Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Rooney. I really appreciate you joining us today. This is one of a set of conversations about my father, Dan Rooney, and his approach to his professional life. I recently wrote a book called A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's Story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. And instead of just having me sit around and talk about him, I invited a few friends. Today, we're going to talk about my father's work in the community. So with me today are Mel Blount. Mel is the greatest cornerback to ever put on a uniform in NFL history. And he also started the Mel Blount Youth Home that serves children in need. Charlie Batch. Charlie is a forever Steeler. From the minute he got to the Steelers, we knew he was one of us forever. He started the Best of the Batch Foundation, which we're looking forward to talking about. And Franco, one of few people who you don't even need his last name. Franco's known for the greatest play in NFL history, but those of us who know him well understand that his work in the community is even more immaculate. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I love the work that you do. As I said, I want to talk about my father, and the first thing I really want to focus on is how you get to serving the community. And I think to him, it was about personal challenges, whether it was stepping into a difficult situation like he did in Ireland or with the Rooney Rule, or dealing with people who are having challenges in your organization. I think he understood that you needed empathy and you needed to be a good listener to be successful. So let me start, Franco, with you. Is there any lessons you learned from my father, the Steelers, related to personal challenges you felt in, stepping into the different aspects of your life?
Challenges are the things that really help us grow and help us become who we are. And there are always these different challenges and the different things that you get out of them. Like I would say, along the way, like I have always been one to observe people, and I kind of observe people from afar. And to watch what they do, to watch how they handle themselves, to see how they handle challenges. But also one thing I always observe is the quiet things that people do around the community, and see how they go about that. And that did have an effect on me, from your grandfather and from your father. That they would do things around the community, but didn't want attention. They just did it very quietly. But what was important is that they were involved, and they just continued to be involved to make the community a better place.
Thanks, Franco. My father, I think, would be saying, "Are you still talking about that darn book? Quit talking about me." So, Charlie, you came to Pittsburgh. You were a star in Detroit. You came here. You knew you were signing a backup role, and I've talked about this many times. I think your influence in the early part of Ben Roethlisberger's career was so important because you were willing to step up, help guide him, but from a role that had to be a challenge. You were a star all your life, and then you came, and I think it was the first time you were a backup, but you meant so much to our team and our organization, the role you played from that. Can you talk a little bit about that challenge?
Yeah, and it was, growing up in Pittsburgh, Homestead area, and growing up a Steeler fan, you heard a lot about Steelers, your family's a Steeler fan, and, to Franco's point, a lot of things that were going on in the community, they didn't want the notoriety, but it always came back to the Steelers are a part of it. So seeing that being and wanting to be a part of it growing up, I just remember in 1998, we were preparing for the combine. We're in Indianapolis, and I knew the Steelers weren't looking for a quarterback at that point, but I made it a point to walk into that room and introduce myself to Mr. Rooney. And I'm like, "How you doing? I'm Charlie Batch." He's like, "I know who you are. Bring it in," and gave me a hug. And I'm like, "Oh, hey, Mr. Rooney." It was almost like he felt like he knew me forever, but I wanted to make sure I introduced myself to him and Coach Cowher. And I said, if there was ever an opportunity for me to play for the Steelers organization, I would love to do so. Didn't know how it was going to happen, but in 2002, had the opportunity to sign with the Steelers, and of course was granted an extension. And at that point, not too long after, was Ben Roethlisberger signing on. And like you mentioned, as a young guy, he was trying to mold and shape and become the player that he was hoping to become. But it was different because I went from being a starter in Detroit, now having to lead from behind in the backup role, supporting him, but also understanding that, hey, if I ever needed to be called upon, I could do so, but without doing so as a threat to him as he's trying to evolve into that leader with the team. So it was important. We had a lot of great similarities coming into the league, mainly Mid-American Conference, how difficult it is going from Miami of Ohio, coming from Eastern Michigan like myself, to now prove that you belong when all of these powerhouse conferences and players that people know, they knew already. And it was just something that we really had a common bond from the first minute he walked into the door.
Well, your selflessness, I think, represented the best of the Steelers. So we're always so grateful, and went on and won a lot of games for us, a lot of important games as well. Mel, you and I have talked many times about the many challenges you've had. You know, on the field, you were the best player at your position in the history of the game. Off, you really stepped into, you know, a situation that brought about daily challenges. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And again, was there any influence that the Steelers had in how you faced those?
Well, you know, coming to the Steelers in 1970 as a young man, all the things that I've learned and all the influence came from the Steelers. I mean, I remember when Dan Rooney actually was taking over from your grandfather, and how he really turned this franchise into one of the great franchises in the history, because we all know the Steelers history that, you know, they didn't win any games. When Joe Green was drafted, they won one game and lost 13. And so I think if I can tell this one story, is that there was a priest by the name of Father Kavanaugh who was in the locker room. This was like in the late 80s, early 90s. And I had retired, of course, but I met him. Your father introduced me to him. And he asked me, he said, well, what are you doing now? I said, well, I have this boys home that I'm working with young inner city kids. He said, oh, you need to bring a group of kids to Ireland. And I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't bring a group of kids to Ireland. You know, that was foreign to me. But lo and behold, your father, through the Ireland Fund, helped us to get, and we took a group in, and what the priest said, he said, the kids in Ireland has never been around black kids. He said, you need to bring some kids. So I sent my staff, first of all, my wife and I, we flew to Ireland and checked the place out, went to Belfast, and then we came back and put together a group of kids from our program that we, you know, obviously felt that we could trust sending that far, along with staff, and I never forget this whole process of getting their passports and visas, and how the Ireland Fund, through your father's influence and help us pull that off. And it was one of the great experiences that those young people had. And so that's just one story of how your father has influenced so many people like myself, and nobody never knew about it. And so I think from watching, you know, Dan and watching your grandfather, all of our lives obviously has been influenced by their work and the way they do things and the way they did things.
I think that was very important for your father, to try to bring people of different cultures and different backgrounds together, and to learn from one another and to get to know one another.
Yeah, Franco, that's so right. I mean, we all saw it. You know, he just had that great knack of people who had differences. You know, in Ireland, it was these Catholics and Protestants. Here with the Rooney Rule, you know, so many different things. He just understood that there was something more than the differences people had, and had this amazing way. You know, Dad was what, 5'6", 5'7", of getting people who were involved in all kinds of difficult, you know, in Ireland, violent situations, and getting to sit down and talk to each other. And again, that's why I wanted all three of you here, because I think you each do that in a special way. You bring different communities and different pieces of the community together. Let's shift a little bit to the organizations that you're part of, my father also understood that you needed those personal qualities, and that was critical. But building out organizations, or Franco, in your case, you supported so many different organizations. He understood that it was great to be one person who was empathetic and a good listener, but you also needed, a larger system if you really were going to make a significant change. Charlie, you're in the midst of launching a new phase of the Batch Foundation. You want to talk a little bit about what's going on there, and does that relate at all to things you saw my father do in building, organizations to help the community?
Yeah, and I think this is, watching Mr. Rooney, he was really big in the United Way, and that was something that I followed immediately when I got here. And at that point, I remember sitting down with him, and he says, what are you looking to do, more in the community? I know there's other things that you want to do. And at that point, I told him I have my foundation, which is called Best of the Batch Foundation. We had some one-off programs, but we were looking to grow and expanding larger. And at that point, we were dealing with roughly about 100 kids, around 25 volunteers. Told him the vision. And at that point, he said, listen, this is what's going on. He said, nobody cares what your title is. He said, nobody will believe, until they believe in what you're trying to do, that's when they'll start following you. And at that point, that's when I was like, wow, okay. We, we started doing that. And next thing you know, we were at 300 kids. And here we are 20 years later, and we serve 3,800 kids annually through 13 different programs with our foundation. And now with an expansion, we're adding on 27,000 additional square feet to our building, making it 33,000 square feet in whole. And now will allow us to push our numbers over 4,000 kids. And that was something that was important for us, because I wanted people to not only see what we were doing, but also be excited about the expansion as we enter into this new phase with the Best of the Batch Foundation. So we are super excited about that, and we will definitely be ready to roll everything out come spring of 2021. So we're excited about that.
Perfect. Mel, you're at the other end. You've done this now for over 30 years. What do you look back at? We're so proud of everything you've done, but what do you look back at? And again, was there wisdom that maybe in the early days you learned from one of these folks in the Steelers organization that now you look back and say, wow, that really was more important than maybe I thought going in?
Well, when I got ready to retire in 1983, one of the great things, and I tell you, everybody down in Vidalia, Georgia talks about this. Your father, along with Chuck Noll and Franco and Joe Green, we had a whole list of guys who flew down to Vidalia, and we had groundbreaking ceremonies to build that home down there. And we had a big parade through the small city there of Vidalia, and then everybody wound up out at the farm for the groundbreaking ceremonies. And that's when I really, really knew that the Steelers organization really cared about what their players were doing off the field. And Chuck and his wife, Marianne, and of course, your father, and they talked to some of the officials down there. We just had a great time, and just their presence spoke volume in that community about their support for me and how important it is that we got that program off the ground. And that's been 35 years ago. And I'll never forget out here in Claysville when we were having all the issues with, what we're dealing with, non-racism. And so we had a lot of issues out here that we were dealing with, and your father would always check in with me. And so it's little things like that really that speaks volume about what Dan stood for and how he cared about his players. And I want to say this to Charlie and all the young Steeler players. It's so important, Charlie, and I'm so proud of you and what you're doing in the community. Because guys like myself, we're getting that age where, we'll be off the scene here soon. But it's these young Steeler players that really buy in and really understand what being a Steeler is all about. And Dan has laid that foundation. It's about giving back and being a part and being leaders in your community. And Charlie's doing a great job, and hopefully the Steelers to come will continue to follow that blueprint and continue to give back in their communities.
Mel, you stole my question to Franco. Franco, we're at this point in the community, whether it's race, which is we're at such a critical moment, but also beyond, so many needs in the community, in the world, because of the race situation, because of COVID, and athletes, players have such a platform. I don't know that there's a player alive that's done as much and has been as committed as you have for so long. What advice would you give to players of how they can use their platform, how they can use that power to really affect change in a meaningful way?
What really helped to make it work is that we look at our Steelers as a family. And a lot of us got different things from it, just like when you're a family, you see and you experience different things that help shape and mold you into who you become. But feeling like you're part of a family and knowing that this was a period of our time, a very important growth period of our time that had a big influence. And I guess that the Steelers can probably look at it and say, okay, how did we do by the offsprings that are from the organization? And so when you look at what people are doing around the community to make a difference, I think the Steelers should feel pretty proud.
I just wanted to say thank you. We're so often, when I'm in front of audiences, people say, do the Steelers bring people in that are going to be, do we teach them to do the things that you folks do? And I said, no, we try to bring decent people in, and decent people, it's part of them to go out and serve the community. And I just want to thank you, for being, people of courage, people of compassion, and people of decency. It's such a privilege for me to walk around with this association because of the way you all live. So thank you so much for what you do. Keep it going, and I appreciate your time this morning.